At the very core of human existence lies a profound, often unspoken yearning for connection. We are fundamentally wired to seek out the warmth and safety of another, a drive that dictates much of our joy and our sorrow. This exploration begins with an examination of the invisible forces that govern adult relationships, pulling back the veil on the profound science that explains why we love the way we do and how our deepest bonds are formed and maintained. Is love enough? Consider the story of a vibrant, capable individual whose life begins to unravel when she meets someone who is endlessly charming but emotionally elusive. The initial spark of attraction quickly becomes a consuming fire, yet it brings more anxiety than warmth. Despite clear signals that her new partner is incapable of providing stability, she is drawn deeper into a labyrinth of mixed messages. Love, in its most raw and unguided form, often feels like it should be enough to overcome any obstacle. Yet, when faced with the agonizing push and pull of a partner who fears closeness, this belief shatters. The emotional toll of waiting, hoping, and agonizing over every delayed call reveals a startling truth. Profound affection alone cannot bridge the gap between two entirely different relational languages. The distress experienced is not a sign of personal weakness, but rather an ancient biological system reacting to a perceived threat of abandonment. From the therapeutic nursery to a practical science of adult love. The journey to understanding this dynamic does not begin in the realm of adult romance, but rather in the quiet observations of the therapeutic nursery. It was here, amidst the interactions between mothers and their young children, that the foundational patterns of human bonding were first decoded. The profound realization emerged that the way infants cling to, seek comfort from, or pull away from their caregivers mirrors the very ways adults navigate romantic intimacy. This bridge from the nursery to the bedroom transforms abstract psychological theory into a tangible, practical science, offering a vital lens through which the perplexities of adult love can be comprehended. The secure, the anxious, and the avoidant. Humanity, in all its relational complexity, generally falls into three distinct emotional landscapes. There are those who navigate the waters of intimacy with grace and ease, finding comfort in closeness without the looming shadow of fear. These individuals embody a secure foundation. Then there are those whose hearts beat with a frantic rhythm, constantly craving reassurance and perpetually worried about the permanence of their partner's affection. This anxious perspective turns love into an agonizing vigil. Finally, there are those who equate deep intimacy with a suffocating loss of freedom, instinctively keeping their lovers at arm's length to preserve their fiercely guarded independence. This avoidant stance turns emotional walls into a primary defense mechanism. Where do attachment styles come from? It was once widely held that our relational destinies were exclusively written in our early childhoods, dictated entirely by the sensitivity or aloofness of our parents. Yet the tapestry of human emotional development is far more intricate. While the care we receive as infants lays a critical cornerstone, our genetic predispositions and the totality of our life experiences weave together to shape how we give and receive love. Our relational style is not a fixed sentence from the past, but an evolving interaction between our biology and our history. Tamara and Greg. A fresh perspective. Returning to the perplexing dance of the anxious and the avoidant, this new scientific lens illuminates the seemingly irrational behaviors of lovers trapped in a painful cycle. When an anxious individual clings tightly, it is not out of neurotic desperation, but a hyper-vigilant attempt to secure a bond that feels constantly under threat. Conversely, when an avoidant partner withdraws, it is not necessarily a lack of love, but a primal reaction to the encroaching tide of intimacy. They speak entirely different emotional dialects, exacerbating each other's deepest vulnerabilities. Recognizing these patterns strips away the blame and confusion, revealing a predictable and understandable dance driven by fundamental human needs. Evolutionary ties. To truly grasp the power of these invisible tethers, one must look back to the dawn of our species. The imperative to bond with a significant other is woven into our very DNA, a survival mechanism forged in the crucible of prehistoric existence. In a world fraught with mortal danger, isolation equated to death. Those who sought proximity and protection from a trusted companion were the ones who survived and passed on their genes. We are the inheritors of an emotional brain that views the physical and psychological presence of a loved one as a matter of absolute survival. The modern world may have eliminated the predators of the savannah, but the ancient primal panic of separation remains entirely intact within our neurology. Protest behavior in the digital age. When this vital connection is threatened, our biology demands action. The frantic desire to re-establish contact, once expressed by a child crying for a lost mother, now manifests in the relentless checking of a smartphone, the strategic silence, or the dramatic threat to leave. These actions are not mere immaturity. They are profound protest behaviors driven by a desperate evolutionary mandate to pull an elusive partner back into the safety of proximity. In the modern era, our ancient survival instincts are constantly triggered by the digital ambiguities of our romantic lives. From theory to practice, developing specific attachment-based interventions. Understanding these ancient echoes is only the first dawn of awareness. The true transformation occurs when this theoretical knowledge is forged into practical wisdom. By observing the myriad ways these styles interact in everyday life, it becomes possible to design targeted interventions. This is the alchemy of turning scientific observation into actionable guidance, offering a roadmap for individuals at every stage of their relational journey. Whether navigating the precarious early days of dating, attempting to heal a fractured relationship, or enduring the crushing weight of a breakup, these principles offer a concrete strategy for emotional salvation. Putting insights into action. As these concepts take root in the mind, the world of romance shifts from a baffling mystery to a predictable terrain. The agonizing analysis of a partner's mixed signals is replaced by a clear-eyed assessment of their emotional capacity. The exhausting pursuit of someone inherently incapable of closeness falls away, making room for the pursuit of genuine, secure connections. The drama and the heartbreak are gradually replaced by the quiet, profound satisfaction of finding a partner who can provide a true haven. Going forward. The path ahead is illuminated by this profound understanding of our deepest emotional mechanics. By deciphering our own intrinsic needs and recognizing the emotional blueprints of those around us, the journey toward lasting love ceases to be a blind gamble and becomes a conscious, empowered choice. We've come a long way, but not far enough. Yet, society often stands in direct opposition to our biological truths. There exists a pervasive cultural narrative that champions absolute self-sufficiency and views emotional reliance as a fatal flaw. We are taught that true happiness must be entirely self-generated, and that needing another person is a sign of weakness or pathology. This modern obsession with independence mirrors past, misguided psychological eras that warned against showing too much affection to children. We have evolved past the draconian child-rearing advice of the past, yet we still harbor deeply damaging prejudices against adult dependency. Attachment needs. They're not just for children. The assumption that we outgrow the need for a secure attachment figure is a profound fallacy. From the moment we draw our first breath to our final days, the necessity for a deep, intimate connection remains a central pillar of our existence. The adult heart requires the reassurance of a partner's availability just as fervently as a child seeks the comforting gaze of a parent, while adults can temporarily sustain themselves on the knowledge of a partner's emotional presence. The fundamental requirement for a bonded connection never dissipates. The codependency myth. A particularly insidious modern philosophy suggests that any profound reliance on a romantic partner is a form of toxic enmeshment or codependency. We are instructed to maintain rigid boundaries and to never allow our inner peace to be disturbed by the actions of our lover. This perspective portrays the ideal relationship as an alliance between two entirely self-contained entities. It preaches that to lean heavily on another is to suffer from a dangerous emotional addiction. While originally intended to address genuine dysfunction, this ideology has been misapplied to healthy, essential human bonding, pathologizing our most natural instincts. The biological truth, the stark reality confirmed by modern neuroscience, completely dismantles the myth of total emotional independence. When we bond with a significant other, we cease to be entirely separate physiological entities. Our partners become biological regulators of our heart rate, our breathing, and our stress hormones. We are inextricably woven into each other's biological functioning. To demand absolute differentiation from the person we love is to demand a biological impossibility. Our bodies are literally synchronized to the presence and support of our mates. The dependency paradox. Herein lies the most beautiful and counterintuitive truth of human connection. The deeper and more effective our dependence on a loved one, the more autonomous and daring we can be in the world. True independence does not arise from forced isolation. It blossoms from the fertile ground of absolute security. When we know, without a shadow of a doubt, that someone has our back, we are emboldened to take risks, explore new horizons, and achieve our fullest potential. The strange situation test. This paradox is perfectly illustrated by observing a young child in an unfamiliar room. When the mother is present, acting as an anchor, the child bravely explores, plays, and engages with the world. The moment the mother departs, the exploration ceases, replaced by frantic distress and a desperate search for connection. Only upon the mother's return, once the child is held and the bond is reaffirmed, can the child resume their interaction with the environment. The mother's presence does not stifle the child, it liberates them. A secure base for grown-ups. The adult arena of careers, ambitions, and personal growth is our equivalent of the room full of toys. When we are bolstered by a partner who acts as a steadfast, secure base, someone who believes in us, supports our goals, and offers a safe harbor during storms, we are empowered to conquer our challenges. Conversely, a partner who is inconsistent or dismissive drains our energy and focus, leaving us struggling to navigate even the simplest of life's demands. Finding the right person to depend on. The ultimate question, then, is the consequence of choosing a partner who fails to fulfill this vital, biologically mandated role. To tether oneself to someone who cannot provide a reliable, secure base is to invite a chronic state of physical and emotional tension. It is a decision that impacts not just our happiness, but our literal longevity and physical health. A truly dependable partner is not a luxury. It is a fundamental requirement for a thriving existence. Using this book, armed with this profound science, the quest for a fulfilling relationship transforms from a chaotic struggle into a focused, enlightened pursuit. By shedding the damaging myths of complete independence and embracing the beautiful reality of the dependency paradox, we open the door to connections that heal, empower, and endure. The process of deciphering the invisible forces that govern our emotional connections requires, first and foremost, a set of practical tools. To truly grasp the mechanics of adult attachment, we must turn our gaze inward before we look outward. The journey toward understanding the intricacies of love begins with identifying our own emotional blueprint. By assessing our deeply ingrained relational habits, we unlock the ability to comprehend not just ourselves, but the partners we choose, allowing us to navigate the complex world of romance with clarity and purpose. Step 1. What is my attachment style? The fundamental starting point for integrating this profound psychological framework into daily life is self-discovery. Before attempting to decode the emotional language of a romantic partner or a prospective date, it is imperative to map out the contours of your own relational landscape. The person you inhabit and know most intimately is yourself, and evaluating your own patterns is the cornerstone of this process. Which attachment style am I? To accurately gauge your personal orientation toward intimacy, one must engage in a process of honest self-reflection. Psychologists have developed comprehensive assessments to measure the specific ways individuals perceive and react to closeness in romantic contexts. These evaluations, grounded in extensive scientific observation, analyze how you respond to fundamental relationship dynamics. By examining your own reactions to various scenarios, such as your comfort level with depending on a partner, your fears of abandonment, or your instinctive desire to maintain independence, you begin to paint a clear picture of your emotional default settings. These styles, though deeply ingrained and generally stable, possess a remarkable degree of plasticity. They are not rigid life sentences, but rather fluid frameworks that can evolve over time. Gaining a precise understanding of your unique attachment profile is a powerful act of self-awareness. It illuminates the unconscious motivations behind your actions and reactions, providing a vital compass for your interactions with others, and ultimately paving the way for more profound and enduring happiness in love. What if I'm still not sure? For many, discovering the concept of attachment brings an immediate shock of recognition. The descriptions resonate so deeply that identifying their own category becomes instantaneous and undeniable. However, for others, the lines may blur, and they might find themselves identifying with traits from multiple categories. If the path to self-classification seems ambiguous, it is essential to understand the underlying architecture that determines these relational styles. The two attachment dimensions. The foundation of our romantic behavior is built upon two distinct intersecting dimensions. The first dimension evaluates the degree to which an individual feels comfortable with intimacy and closeness, or, conversely, the extent to which they instinctively attempt to evade it. The second dimension revolves around the level of anxiety regarding a partner's love and attentiveness, manifesting as a preoccupation with the relationship's stability. Visualizing these dimensions as a continuum provides a powerful overview of the emotional landscape. Your precise location within these two spectrums dictates your overarching attachment style. Those who find themselves experiencing low avoidance and low anxiety reside in the realm of the secure. They embrace intimacy naturally and navigate love without excessive worry about reciprocation. Conversely, those who crave deep closeness but are perpetually plagued by insecurities and hyper-vigilant to perceived slights inhabit the anxious sphere. On the other end, individuals who fiercely guard their independence, equating closeness with a loss of freedom while remaining relatively unconcerned about their partner's emotional state, define the avoidant category. In rare instances, individuals may experience a paralyzing combination of both high avoidance and high anxiety, creating a highly complex relational dynamic. Out of the mouths of babes. The origins of these classifications are rooted not in the complex world of adult romance, but in the raw, unfiltered emotional expressions of infancy. The foundational observations of attachment were made by watching toddlers navigate the stress of brief separations from their caregivers. The profound distress and ambivalent reunions exhibited by some infants perfectly mirror the turbulent reactions of anxious adults. The composed resilience and quick recovery of other infants foreshadow the balanced approach of secure adults. Most tellingly, the infants who masked their internal panic with an outward facade of indifference laid the blueprint for the avoidant adult who outwardly dismisses intimacy while their internal physiology registers profound stress. Step 2. Cracking the code. What is my partner's style? While identifying your own emotional blueprint is an internal process, deciphering the attachment style of another is a significantly more complex endeavor. In the early stages of romance, the intoxicating rush of attraction often obscures objectivity, making it difficult to clearly perceive the signals a new partner is transmitting. Yet, armed with the right psychological tools, one can become a keen observer, capable of translating everyday actions and casual conversations into profound insights regarding a partner's capacity for intimacy. Questionnaire: determining your partner's attachment style. Evaluating a partner does not require formal psychological testing. It demands astute observation. By carefully assessing a partner's behavioral patterns over time, one can accurately gauge their underlying attachment orientation. This behavioral assessment can be broadly categorized into 3 distinct groupings that reflect their core relational instincts. Group A. This category encapsulates the behaviors of those who instinctively maintain emotional distance. It involves a tendency to send mixed signals, constantly alternating between alluring vulnerability and cold aloofness. Such individuals fiercely protect their independence, often viewing natural emotional dependency with disdain. They may subconsciously devalue their partners as a defense mechanism and rely heavily on distancing strategies, both physical and emotional. They fiercely guard their boundaries, harbor unrealistically romanticized views of what a flawless relationship should look like, and often exhibit a profound mistrust, fearing that a partner might impinge upon their freedom or take advantage of them. During conflicts, their primary instinct is to escape, leaving their intentions unclear and making direct conversations regarding the relationship's future deeply uncomfortable. Group B. This grouping reflects the actions of those who provide a stable and secure emotional foundation. These individuals are characterized by their unwavering reliability and consistency. They prioritize joint decision-making and possess a flexible, accommodating view of relationships. They excel in communicating their feelings and needs, demonstrating a natural ability to reach compromises during disagreements. They are undaunted by commitment or the natural dependencies that arise in a loving bond. For them, closeness acts as a catalyst for further intimacy rather than a trigger for withdrawal. They naturally integrate partners into their social circles, express their affections generously, and operate completely without the need for manipulative emotional games. Group C. The final category embodies the intense, often turbulent behaviors of those who are chronically preoccupied with connection. Individuals in this group express an overwhelming desire for profound closeness and physical contact, yet are simultaneously plagued by deep-seated insecurities and a paralyzing fear of rejection. They often feel a sense of unease or incompleteness when unattached and sometimes resort to game-playing or manipulative tactics in a desperate bid to maintain their partner's attention. They frequently struggle to articulate their distress directly, expecting their partners to magically intuit their needs, and may act out aggressively when those unspoken needs go unmet. They are prone to personalizing their partner's actions, allowing the other to dictate the relationship's pace to avoid getting hurt, and often harbor chronic, agonizing suspicions regarding fidelity. Scoring key. By systematically evaluating a partner's behaviors against these categories, a clear pattern inevitably emerges. A high prevalence of behaviors from the first group signifies an avoidant style, indicating a fundamental discomfort with intimacy that will require constant negotiation for space. A dominance of traits from the second group reveals a secure partner, one who naturally fosters a safe and loving environment devoid of emotional games. Conversely, a strong alignment with the third group points to an anxious style, revealing a partner who craves deep connection but requires consistent patient reassurance to quell their hypersensitive emotional alarm system. The golden rules for deciphering attachment styles. When the behavioral evidence seems contradictory or confusing, a specific set of guiding principles serves as a definitive tool for cutting through the noise and revealing the truth. First and foremost, one must determine whether the individual genuinely seeks intimacy and closeness. This is the foundational question. All other behaviors radiate from this core desire or lack thereof. Second, it is crucial to assess their level of preoccupation with the relationship and their overall sensitivity to rejection. Third, one must look beyond isolated incidents, as attachment styles are defined by a consistent tapestry of behaviors that form a coherent emotional pattern over time. Fourth, the most revealing test is observing their reaction to effective direct communication. When you bravely articulate your needs, their response, whether it be empathetic accommodation, eager reciprocation, or defensive dismissal, will expose their true capacity for partnership. Finally, one must become adept at listening to the unspoken, realizing that the actions a partner fails to take often speak volumes louder than their explicit declarations. Cracking others' attachment style cheat sheet. Mastering the art of observation allows for the creation of a mental framework that categorizes behaviors swiftly and accurately. It involves recognizing the stark contrasts inherent in romantic dynamics, the avoidant's mixed signals versus the secure's reliability, the anxious individual's game-playing versus the secure's straightforward honesty, the avoidant's rigid boundaries versus the secure's flexible compromises. This mental mapping transforms the confusing, often painful landscape of dating into a navigable terrain, empowering individuals to make highly informed choices about where to invest their emotional energy. Deciphering Attachment Styles Workshop. Applying these principles to real-world scenarios hones the ability to read the subtle signs of human connection. Consider the individual who claims to be seeking love but preemptively establishes rigid, uncompromising rules for any future partner, fiercely guarding against perceived exploitation. Despite their stated desires, their underlying narrative screams of an avoidant mechanism designed entirely to keep true intimacy safely at bay. Contrast this with the person who seamlessly adapts to a partner who doesn't perfectly fit their initial ideal, confidently communicating their needs and helping the other navigate their shortcomings. Their ability to confront issues directly and adapt gracefully is the epitome of secure attachment in action. Then there is the individual who agonizes over every minor interaction on a first date, terrified that a single misstep will shatter the fragile possibility of love. Their paralyzing fear of rejection and intense preoccupation with the budding relationship perfectly illustrate the anxious mind at work. Even seemingly romantic declarations, such as a relentless search for a flawless soulmate, must be critically scrutinized. When an individual continuously finds minute faults in otherwise wonderful partners, always believing that a perfect mythical love is waiting just around the corner, this idealism is rarely rooted in romance. Instead, it serves as a powerful unconscious distancing strategy, a tool used to systematically dismantle any genuine present-day connection. By continuously analyzing the emotional narratives of those around us, the ability to decipher attachment styles evolves from a theoretical concept into an intuitive, life-altering skill. For those who traverse the world with an anxious heart, love often feels less like a safe harbor and more like an ever-shifting landscape filled with unseen hazards. The desire for profound, unyielding connection is matched only by the persistent, gnawing fear that this connection might suddenly vanish. This is not a choice, nor is it a character flaw. It is a deeply embedded way of experiencing intimacy, where every nuance of a partner's behavior is magnified and analyzed for hidden meaning. To live with this orientation is to navigate relationships with an emotional antenna constantly tuned to the frequency of potential loss. You're only as troubled as the relationship you're in. A pervasive tragedy of the anxious experience is the internalization of relationship strife as personal pathology. When constantly triggered by a partner who maintains emotional distance or acts inconsistently, an anxious individual may begin to view their own natural need for reassurance as a crippling defect. They label themselves as needy or too much, failing to realize that their distress is not an independent sickness, but a direct biological reaction to an unstable environment. In the presence of a truly reliable and affectionate partner, this overwhelming anxiety often evaporates. The supposed emotional instability is, in reality, a contextual response. One is only as troubled, as hypervigilant, and as desperate as the specific relationship demands them to be. A sensitive attachment system. To understand this dynamic is to recognize the existence of a highly calibrated emotional alarm network. For some, this system requires a massive provocation to sound the alert. For the anxious mind, however, the senses are exquisitely sensitive. A slight shift in a partner's tone, a delayed response to a message, or a fleeting look of distraction can be enough to trip the wire. This sensitivity is not an invention of the conscious mind. It is an automatic, physiological mechanism designed to monitor the proximity and availability of a loved one. When the system perceives a threat, real or imagined, it floods the body with stress hormones, rendering it impossible to focus on anything other than re-establishing contact. Activating strategies. Once the alarm sounds, the mind deploys a specific arsenal of thoughts and feelings designed to force reconnection. These are powerful, undeniable impulses that compel the individual to seek physical and emotional proximity. They might manifest as an obsessive rumination about the partner, a sudden magnification of the partner's positive traits while ignoring their flaws, or an overwhelming physical ache in their absence. These internal strategies are biologically mandated efforts to compel the individual back into the safety of their partner's orbit. The working of the attachment system. Operating largely below the threshold of conscious awareness, this mechanism hijacks the brain's executive functioning. Rational thought is sidelined as the primal imperative for survival, equated here with the presence of the attachment figure, takes the helm. The individual becomes entirely consumed by the singular goal of restoring equilibrium, until the partner provides a clear, unmistakable signal of reassurance and availability. The system will not disengage, leaving the anxious person trapped in a state of high alert. Living in the comfort zone. Ryan and Shauna. Consider a partnership where the natural ebb and flow of closeness is respected, where communication is transparent, and where both individuals prioritize each other's emotional safety. In such an environment, the anxious individual thrives. The constant ambient reassurance acts as a balm to their sensitive alarm system. They do not need to resort to desperate measures because their need for connection is met before it ever becomes a crisis. This demonstrates that an anxious disposition is not inherently doomed to suffering. It simply requires a specific relational climate, a comfort zone, to flourish. Protest behavior, letting your attachment system get the best of you. However, when reassurance is withheld, the internal activation inevitably spills over into outward action. These actions are often perceived by observers as dramatic, manipulative, or irrational, but they are, at their core, desperate pleas for connection. Withdrawing, keeping score, acting hostile, or threatening to leave are all paradoxical attempts to elicit a loving response from an elusive partner. The tragedy of these actions is that they frequently achieve the exact opposite of their intended goal, pushing away the very person whose closeness is so desperately desired. The secret to finding a good relationship. If you are anxious, the most profound realization an anxious person can achieve is that their needs are entirely valid. The path to romantic fulfillment does not lie in attempting to suppress the desire for closeness, but in accepting it as a fundamental requirement. The true secret to lasting happiness is redirecting the immense energy spent trying to decode or change an unavailable partner toward identifying someone who naturally possesses the capacity to meet these deep-seated emotional needs. Gravitational pull. Yet, an invisible, deeply counterintuitive force often draws the anxious toward the very individuals least capable of providing security. There is a magnetic, almost intoxicating quality to the unpredictable dynamic created by an emotionally distant partner. The extreme highs of rare affection and the devastating lows of withdrawal create a cycle of intermittent reinforcement that the brain easily mistakes for passionate love. This turbulent dance feels familiar, confirming deeply held, subconscious beliefs about the inherent difficulty of securing affection. The emotional roller coaster. This gravitational pull results in a harrowing psychological ride. The relationship becomes a series of dramatic crises followed by intense but fleeting reconciliations. The anxiety is mislabeled as excitement, and the profound relief felt when the partner temporarily returns is mistaken for profound intimacy. Over time, the anxious individual becomes addicted to this very turbulence, equating peace and stability with boredom. If you're anxious, you shouldn't be dating someone avoidant because the architecture of these two styles is fundamentally incompatible. While one requires constant closeness to feel safe, the other requires constant distance to feel independent. Engaging in this dynamic guarantees a perpetual state of emotional starvation for the anxious partner. Every attempt to bridge the gap will be met with resistance, and every assertion of independence by the avoidant partner will be interpreted as a devastating rejection. It is an unwinnable war of attrition that will inevitably erode the anxious person's self-esteem. The law of large numbers. Why you are more likely to meet avoidance when you go out on a date. The dating pool itself presents a statistical challenge. Those who are comfortable with intimacy tend to pair off quickly and remain in long-term relationships, effectively removing themselves from the market. Conversely, those who inherently fear closeness are more likely to cycle through relationships, re-entering the dating pool with high frequency. Furthermore, avoidant individuals rarely date each other, as they lack the emotional glue to sustain a bond. Therefore, they are disproportionately available and disproportionately likely to encounter and attract anxious individuals seeking connection. What happens when you do meet someone secure? When an anxious person finally encounters someone who is consistently available, honest, and reliable, a tragic misinterpretation often occurs. Because the secure individual does not trigger the familiar chaotic alarm system, the interaction lacks the adrenaline rush that the anxious person has come to associate with romance. The absence of anxiety is interpreted as an absence of chemistry. The peaceful reliability of a secure partner feels profoundly uninteresting when one's emotional baseline has been calibrated to high drama. If you're anxious, you should be dating someone secure. Because the antidote to the emotional roller coaster is the steady, unwavering presence of a secure base. A partner who naturally accommodates the need for closeness, who answers calls promptly, and who offers reassurance without resentment is the key to silencing the overactive alarm system. In the safety of this dynamic, the anxious individual is finally free to focus their energy outward, discovering their true potential unburdened by chronic relational terror. What happens when you follow common dating advice? Mainstream dating culture often dispenses advice that is actively harmful to the anxious heart. Mandates to play hard to get, to artificially restrict availability, or to feign independence in the early stages of courtship force the anxious individual to suppress their true nature. This performance not only creates profound internal stress, but also specifically attracts partners who prefer distance, effectively setting a trap for future heartbreak. A coaching session for the anxious attachment style on a date. The imperative, therefore, is absolute authenticity from the very beginning. Dates should not be performances of cool detachment, but genuine explorations of mutual needs. By transparently expressing the desire for closeness and observing the other's reaction, one can quickly filter out those incapable of providing it. The goal is to use one's natural inclinations as a radar system to detect emotional availability, rather than suppressing them to win a game that ultimately leads to suffering. Smoking guns that indicate you're dating someone avoidant. This radar must be attuned to the subtle but undeniable signs of emotional distance. A partner who consistently sends mixed messages, who prioritizes their own rigid schedule over mutual connection, who makes unilateral decisions, or who dismisses emotional concerns as drama, is clearly telegraphing their inability to provide a secure harbor. These are not minor quirks to be overlooked. They are fundamental incompatibilities. Beware. Attachment stereotyping. However, it is crucial to avoid painting all behaviors with a broad, unnuanced brush. Not every instance of needing space indicates a deep-seated fear of intimacy, and not every request for reassurance is a sign of clinical anxiety. The goal is not to pathologize every interaction, but to identify the overarching, consistent patterns that define the relational landscape over time. A final word. Embracing one's anxious nature is the first vital step toward transforming it. By recognizing the biological reality of this need for connection and stubbornly refusing to settle for partners who offer anything less than absolute reliability, the narrative shifts from one of victimhood to one of profound self-advocacy. The lonesome traveler. On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum exists a mindset that equates intimacy with entrapment. For these individuals, traversing the landscape of love feels less like a shared journey and more like a solitary expedition where a partner is often perceived as excess baggage. They navigate relationships with a fiercely guarded perimeter, interpreting the natural dependencies of romance as threats to their hard-won autonomy. This is not necessarily an absence of love, but a profound instinctual belief that safety is found only in self-reliance and isolation. A survival advantage can't buy you love. The evolutionary logic that once favored extreme self-sufficiency, perhaps in environments where attachments were dangerous or transient, translates poorly to the modern quest for profound connection. The very mechanisms designed to protect the individual from the vulnerability of dependence now actively sabotage their ability to experience the deep, sustaining warmth of a shared life. The armor that once ensured survival now guarantees a cold, profound loneliness. Flying solo? This deep-seated desire for independence frequently results in a life lived essentially alone, even when ostensibly part of a couple. The internal narrative constantly emphasizes the burden of compromise and the loss of personal liberty. There is a persistent underlying fantasy of a life unfettered by the demands and emotions of another, a phantom ideal where true happiness is equated with absolute freedom from obligation. Together but apart. The compromise that satisfies no one. When forced by societal expectation or a genuine, albeit conflicted, desire for companionship to enter a relationship, a painful compromise is often struck. The individual attempts to maintain a foot in both worlds, the world of connection and the world of absolute autonomy. They engage in the relationship, but they construct invisible barriers to prevent true emotional merging. This halfway house of intimacy is a breeding ground for resentment, leaving the partner feeling perpetually shut out and the individual feeling perpetually suffocated. Deactivating strategies. Your everyday toolkit for keeping your partner at arm's length or more. To maintain this delicate balance, the mind employs a sophisticated array of tactics designed to suppress the attachment system. These are not always conscious, malicious actions. Rather, they are reflexive defenses deployed the moment intimacy threatens to breach the perimeter. They serve to forcefully dim the intensity of the connection, ensuring that the partner remains at a safe, manageable distance. Some common deactivating strategies. The manifestations of this emotional distancing are myriad. It might involve a sudden, inexplicable focus on a partner's minor physical flaw, an insistence on maintaining secrets to preserve a sense of separate identity, or a physical withdrawal from affection following a moment of deep closeness. It can be seen in the tendency to avoid saying, "I love you," or the subtle undermining of the partner's achievements. Each action is a calculated move to inject space into the relationship, re-establishing the necessary boundary. Thought patterns that leave you out in the cold. The fortress is maintained not just through actions, but through deeply entrenched cognitive habits. The mind continuously generates narratives that justify the emotional distance. These thoughts act as a protective moat, actively preventing the natural progression of bonding and ensuring that the individual remains emotionally isolated, even when a loving partner is readily available. Mistaking self-reliance for independence. At the core of this worldview is a tragic misinterpretation of strength. True independence, as previously explored, arises from a secure base, but the defensive mind conflates independence with absolute self-reliance. The belief that one must never need anyone else for anything. This rigid posture rejects the fundamental biological reality of human interdependence, transforming the natural give and take of a healthy partnership into a sign of weakness. Seeing the worm instead of the apple. To prevent the formation of a deep bond, the mind actively searches for reasons to reject the partner. The focus is relentlessly drawn to imperfections, magnifying minor annoyances until they overshadow all positive qualities. This hypersensitivity to flaws is not an objective assessment of the partner's worth, but a desperately needed justification for maintaining emotional distance. If the partner is flawed, the logic goes, then full commitment is unwarranted. Caution. Read the signs. Navigating a relationship with someone who operates from behind these defenses requires a clear-eyed recognition of their tactics. When a partner consistently emphasizes their need for space, acts dismissive of emotional conversations, or utilizes deactivating strategies to pull away after moments of closeness. These are not temporary moods. They are the defining characteristics of a deeply ingrained defensive structure that fiercely resists true intimacy, longing for the phantom X, looking for the one. Perhaps the most potent deactivating strategy is the reliance on idealized romantic fantasies. By comparing a present, imperfect partner to an impossible standard, the defensive mind successfully sabotages the reality of the current connection. This often takes two distinct, powerful forms. The phantom X. The memory of a past relationship is frequently sanitized and elevated to mythical status. The struggles and incompatibilities of the past are conveniently forgotten, replaced by a nostalgic longing for a lost perfection. This phantom X serves as a perpetual, unbeatable rival, ensuring that the current flesh and blood partner always falls short, thus justifying the emotional distance. The power of the one. Alternatively, the focus is cast forward toward a hypothetical, flawlessly compatible soulmate who exists somewhere in the future. This relentless search for the one is not a romantic quest. It is an impenetrable shield against present-day vulnerability. As long as the individual believes that true happiness awaits with an imagined, perfect partner, they are shielded from doing the messy, difficult work of building intimacy with the flawed, real person standing in front of them. Can avoidance change? The architecture of emotional distance is formidable, but it is not entirely immutable. Change requires a profound, often painful confrontation with one's own defensive mechanisms. It demands the recognition that the very strategies deployed to ensure safety are the precise cause of the deep, underlying loneliness. True transformation begins with a conscious decision to dismantle the fortress, brick by brick. Coaching session. 8 things you can start doing today to stop pushing love away. The dismantling process begins with deliberate, counterintuitive action. It involves recognizing deactivating strategies as they arise and actively choosing not to engage them. It requires focusing intentionally on a partner's positive attributes to short-circuit the worm in the apple mindset. It means viewing the phantom X and the mythical one for what they are, illusions designed to prevent connection. Above all, it requires a conscious effort to practice vulnerability, to lean into the discomfort of closeness rather than fleeing from it. The secure buffering effect. Amidst the turbulence of extreme anxiety and fierce avoidance, there exists a profound emotional equilibrium. Some individuals naturally navigate the complexities of intimacy with an inherent grace, providing a stabilizing force that is nothing short of transformative. When an individual anchored in this stability enters a relationship, their very presence acts as a powerful buffer against the relational storms. They absorb the anxieties and respect the boundaries of their partners, creating an environment where the chaotic extremes of insecurity are gently neutralized. Tell me, is it magic? The ease with which these individuals build and sustain deep connections often appears miraculous to those who struggle with intimacy. They do not agonize over the timing of a text message, nor do they recoil from emotional declarations. They seem to possess an intuitive understanding of how to balance their own needs with the needs of their partner, fostering a bond that is both profound and utterly devoid of game-playing. This seemingly effortless capacity for love is not magic. It is the manifestation of a deeply ingrained emotional intelligence. When threat goes undetected, the core of this stability lies in the calibration of the attachment system. For the secure individual, the threshold for perceiving a threat to the relationship is remarkably high. A partner's momentary distraction or need for space is not immediately interpreted as an impending abandonment or a suffocating demand. Because their internal alarm system remains quiet, they are free to respond to their partner's actions with empathy and reason, rather than defensive panic. Where does this talent come from? This profound emotional resilience is often the product of an environment where early needs were consistently met with sensitivity and care, fostering a deep-seated belief that the world is generally a safe place and that others are inherently reliable. However, it is not exclusively the domain of those with idyllic childhoods. Many cultivate this security through conscious effort, profound self-reflection, and the deliberate choice to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect, tapping into the secure mindset. Creating a secure base for your partner. The hallmark of this orientation is the natural ability to provide a safe harbor. A secure individual intuitively understands the dependency paradox. They know that offering unwavering support and reassurance does not breed weakness, but rather empowers their partner to thrive. They celebrate their partner's successes without envy and offer comfort during failures without judgment. They are the solid ground upon which a truly liberated life can be built. It's not me, it's you choosing a partner. Perhaps their most vital skill is an innate ability to assess emotional availability early in the courtship process. Because they are deeply comfortable with their own worth and their need for intimacy, they do not tolerate game-playing or mixed signals. If a potential partner demonstrates an inability to communicate clearly or a reluctance to commit, the secure individual does not interpret this as a personal failing or a puzzle to be solved. They simply recognize the incompatibility and gracefully move on. Finding the right partner, the secure way. Their dating strategy is defined by clarity and directness. They express their intentions honestly and expect the same in return. They do not view vulnerability as a liability, but as a necessary prerequisite for genuine connection. By refusing to engage in the chaotic dances of anxiety and avoidance, they naturally filter out incompatible partners, leaving space only for those who are capable of matching their emotional maturity. Does this mean that secures are immune to relationship problems? It is a fallacy, however, to assume that an inherent comfort with intimacy translates to a life devoid of relational conflict. Secure partnerships face the same external stresses, life changes, and fundamental disagreements as any other. The difference lies not in the absence of problems, but in the methodology used to resolve them. When conflicts arise, the secure individual approaches them collaboratively, viewing the issue as a shared challenge rather than a zero-sum battle for dominance. How can you tell if things have gone too far? Even the most stable foundations can be eroded by prolonged exposure to profound dysfunction. A secure individual is generally highly accommodating, often willing to absorb the anxieties or navigate the distance of an insecure partner for an extended period. However, they possess a crucial internal boundary. When a relationship begins to systematically dismantle their core sense of self-worth or demands a permanent sacrifice of their fundamental needs, the secure individual recognizes the toxicity and possesses the emotional strength to walk away. A final word of recognition for the secures of this world. To embody this quiet, steady capacity for love is to hold the greatest of relational gifts. It is a state of being that offers a profound blueprint for a fulfilling life, demonstrating that intimacy is not a battlefield to be conquered or a trap to be avoided, but a collaborative sanctuary to be cherished. When two divergent emotional landscapes collide, the resulting impact can shatter the foundations of a relationship. The most common and devastating of these collisions occurs when the insatiable hunger for closeness meets the profound dread of intimacy. This dynamic creates a powerful, often inescapable vortex that consumes the energy, self-esteem, and emotional stability of both individuals involved. To understand this dynamic is to stare into the crucible of human romantic suffering, where profound love and fundamental incompatibility are locked in a tragic embrace. The dirty laundry. Intimate partnerships inevitably strip away the polished facades we present to the world, exposing the raw, unvarnished facets of our psyches. What appears to the outside observer as a minor disagreement over scheduling or a casual comment is, behind closed doors, often a profound clash of fundamental survival instincts. The private sphere becomes an arena where deeply entrenched emotional scripts dictate the rules of engagement. In this space, the anxious partner's desperate need for reassurance and the avoidant partner's reflexive withdrawal trigger a cycle of mutual escalation, turning ordinary misunderstandings into agonizing referendums on the relationship's survival. A romantic bed and breakfast in Vermont. Consider the classic scenario of an idyllic getaway, carefully planned to foster connection. For a couple trapped in opposing attachment styles, the very expectation of uninterrupted intimacy becomes a catalyst for disaster. The anxious partner arrives seeking absolute emotional merging, viewing the weekend as an opportunity to cement their bond. Conversely, the avoidant partner immediately feels the suffocating weight of this expectation. As the physical proximity increases, so does the avoidant's internal panic, leading them to instinctively deploy distancing strategies, perhaps picking a fight over directions, withdrawing into a book, or emotionally checking out. The romantic setting becomes a pressure cooker, exacerbating the fundamental mismatch and transforming what should be a sanctuary into a battleground. When Facebook and abandonment issues meet, the modern digital arena serves as a powerful amplifier for our deepest insecurities. A simple social media interaction can detonate a crisis of monumental proportions. For the anxious mind, an ambiguous post or a delayed response from an avoidant partner is not a trivial oversight. It is perceived as a glaring public signal of rejection. The digital world provides an endless stream of ambiguous data points that the anxious partner frantically attempts to decode, while the avoidant partner views this hypervigilance as an invasive, suffocating violation of their independence. Technology, rather than bridging the gap, frequently hardwires the anxiety and accelerates the cycle of pursuit and withdrawal. The nuts and bolts of the anxious avoidant trap. The mechanics of this trap are as predictable as they are painful. It operates on a tragic, self-reinforcing loop. The anxious partner, feeling a lack of connection, pursues closeness. This pursuit triggers the avoidant partner's fear of engulfment, prompting them to retreat. The retreat confirms the anxious partner's deepest fears of abandonment, escalating their desperate pursuit. This in turn amplifies the avoidant's need for space. They are locked in a perpetually imbalanced dance where the closer one tries to get, the further the other runs. The relationship stabilizes only in a state of profound dissatisfaction, maintaining just enough connection to prevent a breakup, but enough distance to ensure chronic emotional starvation. Telltale signs of the anxious avoidant trap. Recognizing this destructive loop requires observing the overarching atmospheric conditions of the relationship. It is characterized by an agonizing roller coaster of intense highs and devastating lows. There is a pervasive sense of walking on eggshells, where the anxious partner constantly monitors the emotional climate to avoid triggering a withdrawal. Conversations about the status of the partnership are frequently avoided or derail into hostile defensive maneuvers. Most tellingly, there is a fundamental asymmetry in the power dynamic. The partner who requires the least amount of intimacy inevitably dictates the terms of the relationship, leaving the other perpetually hoping for crumbs of affection. Why are intimacy differences so difficult to reconcile? These clashes are remarkably resistant to simple compromise because they do not stem from a misunderstanding of preferences, but from a collision of fundamental biological needs. For the anxious partner, physical and emotional proximity is a matter of profound neurological safety. Without it, their nervous system registers an existential threat. For the avoidant partner, that very same proximity registers as a loss of autonomy and a threat to their survival. Asking either to simply compromise is akin to asking them to ignore the most primal alarm systems in their bodies. Identifying your integrated, secure role model. Escaping this labyrinth requires a massive cognitive and emotional shift. The first step is to recognize that a different, healthier way of relating actually exists. Those trapped in turbulent dynamics often lack an internal template for what a functional, secure bond looks like. The task is to consciously seek out and study a model of secure attachment. This involves observing couples or individuals who navigate intimacy with grace, who communicate needs directly without hostility, and who view mutual dependency as a source of strength rather than a vulnerability. Your relationship with your pet as a secure role model? In the search for a secure template, one often finds the most profound example in an entirely different species. The bond between a human and a cherished animal frequently perfectly encapsulates the essence of secure attachment. This relationship is characterized by absolute reliability, an absence of emotional game playing, and an unconditional acceptance that does not demand the sacrifice of independence. By examining the ease and comfort of this specific bond, one can begin to map the emotional coordinates of what true security feels like, providing a stark contrast to the chaotic turbulence of an anxious, avoidant romance. Reshaping your working models. Armed with a vision of a healthier dynamic, the arduous work of internal reconstruction begins. The deeply ingrained beliefs about love, the assumption that it must be painful, that partners are inherently unreliable, or that vulnerability inevitably leads to rejection, must be systematically dismantled. These are the working models that dictate behavior. Reshaping them involves a profound, ongoing effort to challenge the automatic fear-based narratives that arise in moments of stress, consciously replacing them with thoughts that promote connection and self-worth. Creating your relationship inventory. This cognitive rewiring requires rigorous, unsparing self-examination. It involves documenting the specific triggers that activate the attachment system and analyzing the subsequent cascade of emotions and actions. This is not an exercise in self-blame, but an act of emotional forensic accounting. By writing down the exact sequence of events that lead to a crisis, the delayed text message, the surge of panic, the ensuing protest behavior, the invisible machinery of the relationship is dragged into the harsh light of conscious awareness. Relationship inventory. The inventory acts as an essential, objective mirror. It requires chronicling past and present relational conflicts, detailing not just what was said, but the underlying emotional currents that drove the dialogue. It forces the individual to confront their own defensive strategies and to recognize the predictable patterns that ensure their continued suffering. This stark documentation is a crucial prerequisite for breaking the cycle, as it removes the illusion that the chaos is random or simply the fault of the other person. Common anxious thoughts, emotions, and reactions. In this forensic analysis, a familiar, agonizing internal monologue emerges. The inventory reveals a landscape dominated by a constant, gnawing fear of inadequacy and abandonment. It uncovers the tendency to mind-read, assuming the worst possible motives for a partner's distance. It highlights the physical manifestations of this panic, the tightening of the chest, the inability to sleep, the obsessive checking of the phone. By naming these reactions, they lose their overwhelming power, transforming from uncontrollable biological imperatives into manageable psychological events. My working model summarizing the inventory. The culmination of this self-inquiry is the distillation of the chaotic data into a clear, cohesive understanding of one's own emotional operating system. It is the moment of recognizing, for example, when I feel my partner pulling away, I assume they no longer love me, and I react by becoming hostile to force a reaction. This profound self-awareness is the key that unlocks the possibility of a different choice. Once the script is known, it becomes possible to pause before reciting the familiar, destructive lines. The text message that saved the day. With this newfound awareness, the trajectory of a conflict can be fundamentally altered by a single act of secure communication. Instead of resorting to protest behavior, an individual can choose to express their vulnerability directly. A simple, honest message stating, "I am feeling disconnected and anxious right now, and I need some reassurance," cuts through the games and the defenses. It forces a moment of truth, offering the partner an opportunity to respond with empathy. In a single stroke, this directness can de-escalate a crisis and rebuild the bridge of intimacy. Make becoming secure an ongoing growth process. The journey toward emotional security is not a destination easily reached, but a lifelong commitment to psychological hygiene. It requires constant vigilance against the pull of old habits and a relentless dedication to authentic communication. There will be setbacks and moments where the ancient fears resurface. Yet, the continuous practice of recognizing one's needs, articulating them clearly, and choosing partners who are capable of meeting them gradually rewires the nervous system, transforming the chaotic pursuit of love into a grounded, empowering reality. Deciding to let go of the dream. However, there comes a critical juncture in many anxious avoidant pairings where all the self-awareness and direct communication in the world cannot bridge the fundamental chasm. The profound tragedy of this dynamic is that deep love does not guarantee compatibility. There arrives an agonizing moment of clarity where one must acknowledge that the partner, despite their positive qualities, is simply constitutionally incapable of providing the required emotional sustenance. To remain is to condemn oneself to a life of chronic starvation. Marsha's story. Consider the deeply painful narrative of a woman who spends years attempting to decipher the emotional code of a fiercely avoidant partner. She attends therapy, she reads the literature, she molds herself to accommodate his need for distance, all while slowly sacrificing her own vitality. The relationship is a testament to her endurance, but it is fundamentally devoid of the mutual warmth and security she desperately craves. Her story is not one of a lack of effort, but of a profound, heartbreaking mismatch that no amount of love can ultimately conquer. Opposing forces. In these final stages, the individual is torn between two immensely powerful opposing forces. On one side is the deep biological attachment to the partner, a bond forged through shared history and intermittent reinforcement. On the other side is the fundamental instinct for self-preservation, the undeniable realization that the relationship is actively destroying their emotional and physical well-being. It is a war between the heart's irrational clinging and the mind's desperate plea for salvation. Smoking guns. In Marsha and Craig's story, the decision to sever the bond is rarely sudden. It is the culmination of undeniable, unignorable evidence. These smoking guns are the moments of profound betrayal, not necessarily infidelity, but the consistent, systematic failure to show up emotionally when it matters most. It is the realization that in moments of vulnerability, the partner's primary instinct is to withdraw rather than to comfort. It is the inescapable fact that the fundamental needs for security and closeness will never under any circumstances be met within the confines of this partnership, admitting there's a problem. The final, most courageous act is facing the death of the relationship. It requires abandoning the fantasy that the partner will miraculously change, and accepting the devastating reality of who they actually are. This admission brings a profound grief, a mourning not just for the partner, but for the idealized future that will never materialize. Yet, it is only through this agonizing surrender, through the definitive severing of an irreconcilable bond, that the individual finally frees themselves to seek the secure, sustaining love they fundamentally require. The journey through the intricate landscape of human bonding inevitably leads to a crucial juncture, the translation of profound self-awareness into tangible, transformative action. Understanding the hidden architecture of our emotional desires and the subconscious defenses of our partners is merely the foundation. To truly thrive, this theoretical knowledge must be forged into practical, everyday tools. The final phase of relational mastery lies not in avoiding the inherent frictions of intimacy, but in developing the precise skills required to navigate them. It is here, in the daily crucible of communication and conflict, that the ultimate sanctuary of a secure partnership is built and sustained. Communicating effectively, 101. The cornerstone of any enduring connection is the ability to transmit one's deepest vulnerabilities and necessities across the chasm that separates two individual minds. Effective communication is far more than the simple exchange of logistical information or the airing of surface-level grievances. It is the courageous act of making the invisible, internal world visible to another. For those unaccustomed to such transparency, this process can feel akin to walking a tightrope without a safety net. However, the mastery of this skill is non-negotiable. It requires shedding the armor of passive aggression, silencing the instinct to mind read, and relinquishing the hope that a partner will simply divine what is required. True intimacy demands articulation. It requires the precise, unvarnished expression of one's boundaries and desires, delivered not as an ultimatum or a weapon of blame, but as a map handed to a partner, guiding them toward the very core of one's heart. Getting started. Initiating this level of profound dialogue often requires a monumental shift in habit. The initial attempts are frequently fraught with hesitation and the fear of inciting a destructive argument. The key to embarking on this path is recognizing that the delivery of the message is just as vital as its content. Approaching a partner with an arsenal of accumulated resentments ensures immediate defensive fortification. Instead, the initiation must be grounded in vulnerability. It begins with taking ownership of one's emotional state, using language that centers on internal experiences rather than external accusations. By framing the conversation around personal needs, such as the necessity for reassurance, the desire for dedicated time, or the requirement for a specific boundary, the dialogue transforms from a battlefield into a collaborative problem-solving session. Exercise. Answer the following questions to determine the topic of your script. To bridge the gap between abstract emotion and concrete dialogue, it is often necessary to engage in rigorous mental preparation before a single word is spoken. This preparation involves a deliberate internal interrogation. One must isolate the specific behavior or recurring situation that is triggering emotional distress, stripping away the peripheral noise to identify the core wound. Next, it is crucial to pinpoint the exact emotional response this trigger evokes, whether it be the panic of abandonment, the suffocation of engulfment, or the sting of being undervalued. Finally, one must clearly define the desired outcome. What specific actionable change would alleviate the distress and restore equilibrium? By answering these fundamental questions, the chaotic swirl of anxiety or frustration is distilled into a clear, concise script. This script serves as an emotional anchor, preventing the conversation from drifting into historical grievances and ensuring that the crucial message remains the focal point of the exchange. Can fighting make us happier? As two distinct lives weave together, friction is an absolute biological and psychological certainty. The romanticized ideal of a completely conflict-free partnership is not merely a fiction. It is often an indicator of emotional suppression and dangerous emotional distancing. The health of a bond is not measured by the absence of disagreements, but by the methodology employed to resolve them. Paradoxically, navigating conflict successfully is one of the most potent mechanisms for deepening trust. When a couple endures a passionate clash of needs and emerges on the other side with their connection intact and their understanding enriched, they forge a resilient confidence. They prove to themselves and to each other that their love is robust enough to withstand the inevitable storms of life, transforming the terror of disagreement into a profound source of relational strength. Bread and butter conflicts. The true testing ground for these skills rarely lies in catastrophic, life-altering betrayals, but rather in the mundane, relentless friction of daily existence. These are the routine disputes over household responsibilities, the management of finances, or the allocation of free time. While ostensibly trivial, these bread-and-butter conflicts are deeply symbolic. They are the microscopic arenas where the grand themes of respect, prioritization, and emotional availability are constantly negotiated. How a couple handles a disagreement over holiday plans or evening chores speaks volumes about the underlying structural integrity of their bond. Mastering the art of navigating these daily irritations with grace and mutual respect is the very essence of building a secure, lasting foundation. Why insecure people don't approach conflict head-on. The tragedy of unresolved relational strife often stems from the fact that insecurity inherently sabotages the resolution process. For the anxious mind, a disagreement is instantly magnified into an existential threat to the relationship's survival, prompting a desperate, overwhelming barrage of emotion that makes rational compromise impossible. For the avoidant mind, the very presence of conflict triggers the instinct to flee, leading them to deploy distancing strategies, shut down communication, or minimize the partner's distress. Both responses ensure that the core issue remains unaddressed, allowing resentment to calcify. Because they lack the fundamental belief that the bond can survive a clash of wills, insecure individuals utilize tactics that ironically guarantee the relationship's eventual destruction. Paul and Jackie's kid-sized problem. Consider a common scenario where the differing emotional blueprints of two partners collide over a seemingly straightforward logistical issue, such as the management of a child's schedule. One partner, driven by an anxious need for control and connection, micromanages the details, interpreting any deviation as a sign of neglect. The other, operating from an avoidant desire for autonomy, resents the constant instruction and deliberately withdraws, viewing the partner's anxiety as an intolerable constraint. What begins as a minor scheduling disagreement rapidly escalates into a proxy war over fundamental attachment needs. The child's schedule is entirely secondary. The true conflict lies in the unarticulated terror of abandonment, clashing with the desperate need for independence. How to make secure principles work for you. Transforming these destructive proxy wars into opportunities for growth requires the deliberate application of secure relational strategies. The first principle is maintaining an unwavering focus on the specific issue at hand, rigorously refusing the temptation to weaponize past mistakes or generalize a partner's character. The second requires the absolute preservation of respect, ensuring that anger never morphs into contempt or deliberate cruelty. The third involves recognizing the emotional flooding that occurs during a heated argument and possessing the maturity to call for a temporary cessation of hostilities until physiological calm can be restored. The fourth principle demands the active cultivation of empathy, a genuine attempt to inhabit the partner's emotional reality, even when it directly opposes one's own. Finally, the most crucial element is the consistent reaffirmation of the underlying bond, explicitly reminding the partner that despite the present anger, the commitment to the relationship remains absolute and unshakable. A workshop in conflict strategies. Integrating these principles demands conscious, repetitive practice until they overwrite the deeply ingrained reflexes of insecurity. It is a daily discipline of pausing before reacting, of choosing vulnerability over defensiveness, and of treating a partner's distress not as an attack, but as an urgent plea for connection. It involves dissecting past arguments not to assign blame, but to identify the moments where communication broke down and to map out alternative, healthier responses for the future. This continuous workshop of the heart is the arduous, magnificent labor of love. It is the process by which two imperfect individuals gradually forge a shared emotional language, transforming the chaotic clash of two separate lives into a harmonious, unbreakable symphony of mutual reliance and profound, enduring security.